Unless you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
Yo, welcome to Inside the Numbers. All right, man, it's 2 hours and there's a lot to talk about. I don't think I'm going to get through it all today, but I'm going to do my damnedest to do that. John O'Shea will join us at 12:30. He wrote a fantastic article, and I think we need to stay focused on a couple of things as the country awaits all of this indictment talk. There still is a lot of stuff going on, right? So it can't suck the oxygen out of everything we do. There's a financial crisis looming over us. There's all of this stuff that's going on in Ukraine. And we have senators from supposedly red states attacking people like the Federalist for trying to hold them to account for all this money that's been spent on a war that's being lost. All right. But before we get into it, let's just get the Trump indictment stuff out of the way. I'm on the phone with Don Smith last night. In fact, remember Don Smith? I'm on the phone with Don Smith, and I get this text message from, it's from a source, all right? Basically telling me that the Manhattan DA's office is in a kerfuffle, you know, and things are going on. I want to read this from Kyle Becker because it does sound, maybe this happens today, maybe it doesn't happen for weeks, but apparently Alvin Bragg is under a lot of pressure to drop this case and has ran into a real problem in front of the grand jury the other day. Now, I'm just, instead of rereading it while I go through Kyle Becker. By the way, if you don't check out Kyle Becker's stuff, he does some really good independent journalism. And sometimes he'll just recap stuff for you. And he did that here, and I'm going to read it. I had heard on Monday, there's a different system in New York. All right. Defendants get to basically address the grand jury in a way that a lot of people just aren't accustomed to. In most states, obviously, and I'm no lawyer, but in most states, you just get indicted by the grand jury. The prosecutor presents their case, and that's why there's this old adage, even a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich at a grand jury because it's really very one-sided. However, in New York, they do have a different system. And I'm just going to read what Kyle Becker wrote because I think he absolutely gets to all of the angles of what's going on here. A lot of commentary from Dershowitz and others. All right, so let's get to it. All right. Manhattan DA accused of hiding hundreds of pages of, quote, exculpatory evidence, unquote, from grand jury in Trump case. Folks, this is Andrew Weissman level stuff. Arthur Anderson, remember that? Nobody has been rebuked. No, or at least no federal prosecutor in any opinion that I have ever read by the Supreme Court has been rebuked like Andrew Weissman. And he basically, that had to do with jury instructions and other evidence that, you know, was not apparently presented to the actual jury, not the grand jury. And the Supreme Court spanked him for it. And that conviction was overturned. All right. So anyway, let's get into it. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is being accused of hiding hundreds of pages of exculpatory evidence from the New York grand jury. Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett on Monday, which you got to give it to Greg Jarrett, during the Russia collusion hoax, and it is a hoax. Greg Jarrett was one of the legal voices of reason and really gave a lot of thoughtful commentary on the Mueller probe and everything that had been going on. When you would go, you could click even to Fox News during the daytime and the walls are closing in, And Greg Jarrett, look, if it's his analysis versus the analysis of like Lawrence Tribe or somebody I see on MSNBC, we can only go with the track record, right? And Greg Jarrett's track record of having enough, of course, he's pro-Trump, or at least he's, I would say his own views, I would say lean that way. I think that's fair to say, but it doesn't seem to get in the way of his legal analysis. All right. So he accused Bragg of prosecutorial misconduct and furthermore called for the disbarment of the attorneys involved in the travesty of justice. This is what the source said. And, again, I don't know the legal system like other, Barnes, Greg Jarrett, Alan Dershowitz. But if your staff at the DA's office is apparently in panic mode, pressuring you to drop the case because they're worried about their careers, this is a problem, So will it matter? I don't know. In the end, I don't know. I've always held the view that they're going to conclude that Trump is going to win. Then they're going to do everything in their power to stop him. That's what status quos do. Alvin Bragg here is he's just the agent of that right now. Next could be a grand jury in Atlanta, which, by the way, everyone talks about this and doesn't realize the grand jury that they tried to get to indict Donald Trump did not go along with the prosecution's argument. If you fail in front of a grand jury and now you're just trying to get a redo, the case is flimsy. Grand juries indict. I mentioned it, and this is Greg Jarrett right here. I mentioned it yesterday, I think, when Bob Costello got into the grand jury room and told them, wait a minute, you don't have the hundreds of pages I handed over to Alvin Bragg over here? You only have 6 cherry-picked documents? Hiding from grand juries exculpatory information is reprehensible and unconscionable, Jarrett said. And the conduct of Alvin Bragg and his henchman, Mark Pomerantz, who specifically says in his book, we're targeting zombies because we don't like his beliefs. Those guys should face disbarment proceedings. All right, it'll scroll down. Harvard Law professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz added his perspective on the charges being brought by the Manhattan DA. In my new book, Get Trump, which is a good book, I go through all those 4 allegations and I say there's plenty of smoke, but there's no fire, Dershowitz argued. And if there were a fire, it would be set by arsonists. There is no crime committed in any of the 4 allegations, and I prove that categorically in my book, Get Trump. Where did I get that name? Or the name, Get Trump? I got that from Letitia James's campaign slogan. Her campaign promise, I promise you, I will get Trump. And I want to add something new that hasn't been said before. He continued, I think that Bob Costello has changed his case dramatically. I think that Bragg note now has only 2 possible results from that. Number 1, he can say, all right, I'm going to try to make a case without Cohen. He cannot use Cohen as a witness anymore. That would be unethical because of the testimony that Costello gave, he went on. Or he could say, look, I have to drop the case. He may not be able to make it without Cohen. But if he can't make it without Cohen, he can't make it because no ethical prosecutor is allowed to put on a witness somebody who has told the lies and has contradicted himself so much. So I think that Michael Cohen, after he testified before Congress, was referred to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. Why? Perjury. Everyone knows, I'm not going to bring up the article we did on PPD back then. Everybody knows Michael Cohen lied multiple times under oath in front of Congress. What a lot of people don't know is that Robert Mueller, the Mueller team, led by Andrew Weissman, really looked into this. The notoriously corrupt and political Southern District of New York looked into this. Mueller looked at it, kicked it to the SDNY. The SDNY tried to corroborate things that Michael Cohen had said, and it didn't happen. Why was Michael Cohen involved in this in the first place? Because when Mueller was trying to get Trump, and Weissman were trying to get Trump, they went through everybody that had any peripheral connection to the man. Michael Cohen's finances were not in order, to put it nicely. Him and his wife, the Medallion Cab Company, which is in his wife's name, was used as collateral to secure a loan. They lied about how much the cab company was worth, which had been taking a hit from things like Lyft and Uber. The prosecutors threatened Cohen with putting his wife in jail for 30 years, and Cohen said, please, whatever I can do for you. He got a sweetheart deal, and he tried to offer them testimony to make something stick to Donald Trump, and it didn't work. This whole thing over Stormy Daniels and hush money, payment to a porn star to hide an affair. Again, folks, this stuff happens all the time. I'm not saying that to dismiss it. I'm saying it happens all the time. So, while you're listening to Dershowitz here talk about how much this case hinges on Michael Cohen, there's a reason that Weissman, the most political prosecutor, federal prosecutor, I think, he's at the top of the list. If we were going to rank him, he's up there. He kicks it to the SDNY, another notoriously political and corrupt group of prosecutors, and they refuse to take it because they're not going to do what Alvin Bragg did, which is risk their careers. It's different. Their considerations are different than Alvin Bragg. He is dealing with one-party rule in New York City. His career is less at risk if he was to botch something like this. Federal prosecutors, they bring a case against a president or even a former president, and they screw it up. There will be consequences for it. All right, so just keep that in mind. More than 16 interviews the Manhattan District Attorney had with Michael Cohen. Why did they do that? Because they didn't get the whole story all at once? Come on. They went back and forth, trying to corroborate things. Michael Cohen didn't tell them things that didn't add up. They would go and try to corroborate something. It wouldn't add up. This is what happened with Weissman and with the SDNY. So why on earth would you make this guy your star witness? And what Dershowitz is saying is, you can't do this. As a prosecutor, you cannot take a guy that you know is a liar and put him on the stand and let alone hinge your entire case on it. The so-called, I don't even want to call her a victim. She's not a victim. Stormy Daniels is not a victim. Trump was being extorted. He's technically the victim in this case. Her old lawyer broke the record for the most years sentenced in prison for a federal prosecutor. I mean, in federal prison for an attorney, excuse me. It was like 400 and something years. But that's what he does. And anyway, see Robert Barnes on that. He'll tell you all about Avenatti. I mean, he's been on fire lately, but he's been dumping stuff that, we've talked about for years, but you just don't say it. This is part of a crew. This is what they do. They don't use their law. They don't use their law degree and law license, to pursue justice, ladies and gentlemen. They're extortionists. That's what they do. That's their game. Why? Because there's a lot of money in it. A lot of money. By the way, CNN, multiple people on CNN, including Potato Head, actually took that man seriously as a presidential contender. So I think that Bob Costello, it's a game changer, he added. I think maybe that's a reason for the delay here. I think ethical experts are now telling Bragg, wait a minute, you cannot use Cohen. So if you make it through Pecker, if you make it through some of the other people, okay, go ahead. But if you can't make it without Cohen, you cannot bring this charge. That's a powerful statement, Sean Hannity remarked. On Tuesday, a former legal advisor to Michael Cohen, attorney Robert Costello, was called as a key witness in the New York grand jury investigation into former President Donald Trump's alleged payment to adult actress Stormy Daniels. Costello claimed that testimony from the former Trump attorney is, quote, far from solid evidence, unquote. Costello told reporters following his testimony that Cohen is, quote again, totally unreliable, unquote, in the probe against Trump. He added that the disgraced lawyer is, quote, a convicted perjurer, unquote. I mean, guys, I just don't know how you move forward with somebody like this if this really is your entire case. And it was more than Robert Mueller going through their financials and finding that stuff. Michael Cohen felt he really believed that after Trump won, he was going to be White House chief of staff. And when he didn't get a job in the White House, he felt like Trump had, left him open for exposure. The truth is, even if he was the White House, even if Trump made him White House chief of staff, legislative liaison, something, it would not have stopped Robert Mueller from going through Michael Cohen's finances. All right, so Costello told reporters, right, moving on. I'm the only one who decided to do this. A lot of people caution me against it because I have nothing to gain. The only thing I'm doing is trying to tell the truth to the grand jurors because I read all these lies in the media that are being promoted by one side, said Costello. If you see the full picture, if they want to go after Donald Trump and they have solid evidence, so be it. But Michael Cohen is far from solid evidence, Costello added. This guy, by any prosecutor's standard, and I used to be a deputy chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York, and I want to mention that. I want to talk about that in a second. I wouldn't have touched a guy like Michael Cohen, especially if he's convicted perjurer. What he's saying is, without the perjury considerations, he still wouldn't have used Michael Cohen. He still would not have built a case around Michael Cohen. And what he's saying, how you know it's credible, the SDNY didn't do it. And he was the deputy chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York. This is something that needs to be brought up. Trump has made some bad personnel choices. When it comes to his lawyers in this case, he's obviously demonstrating that he's learned his lesson quite a bit. Costello is like, look, guys, this is a crowd in Manhattan, okay? Trump's legal team is either like one of them or, and the other one, I don't know if I want to say this, but they're all well aware of each other. If you get in trouble in Manhattan, it's a good idea to hire a very well-known and very successful mob attorney. It's a smart move. And I'm not saying that at Costello. I'm just saying that generally here. As noted by the Epoch Times, Cohen pled guilty in 2018 to, quote, charges of tax evasion, making false statements to a federally insured bank, and campaign finance violations in connection with the alleged $130,000 payment to a lawyer representing adult actress Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, unquote. Quote again, Cohen claims that Trump, during his 2016 presidential campaign, directed him to arrange the payment to Daniels as, quote, hush money in order to buy her silence after she claimed to have had an affair with Trump, the reporter added. The money was allegedly paid using campaign funds, a violation of campaign finance law. Donald Trump is expected to face a potential indictment from the grand jury on Wednesday. The former president will reportedly turn himself in to the authorities to face trial, which is, by the way, what a lot of people like Mike Cernovich have been, who were on the DeSantis train, trying to explain to people who were like, well, of course, DeSantis should not have, said he would make sure that a Florida resident would not be, hauled before a blue state grand jury without review to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Folks, it was a no-brainer, political no-brainer. Trump was going to surrender himself anyway. So, of course, there was absolutely no reason not to do that. I think we know, though. Have people big mad last night. All right, let's do this. Let's take a break real quick right now, and then before we move on to our other topic. Again, just remember, just keep in mind that it is in fact known that the star witness is a liar. Have you ever seen a case like this? The charges? Absolutely. John Edwards, John Kerry. There have been other examples of stuff just like this. Hillary Clinton using campaign funds to pay the dossier, to pay Fusion GPS. She just got hit with a fine. They misreported. They did not report it correctly. It's the same thing they're accusing Trump of here. The hush money element to it is irrelevant. It's simply how campaign cash was allocated. Where did it go and for what purpose? That's the core. And we know from John Edwards, we know from others, even Barack Obama had an incident like this. It's a misdemeanor and you get a fine and then nobody really gets charged. The fact that Alvin Bragg would use Michael Cohen and leap this puppy to a felony? No wonder people in his office are scrambling. All right. Why is China hoarding food? And they are. Experts say that China's hoarding a massive amount of food. They will soon have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half of its rice, and half of its wheat. But when asked about it, China lies. One China expert said, of course, never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to global food shortages, China is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. China's the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed. So they can't afford to mess up, or there will be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat. What does this mean for Americans like you and me? 2 words: food shortages. And that's why it's a smart idea to stock up on the kit of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile like Laura and I have done for our family of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. They're hand-packed right in the USA. The kits are compact. They stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. I could rave about it, but the 5-star reviews on their website tell you all about the flavor and taste, folks. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food by typing in the promo code TPP10 at checkout. That's again, go to 4patriots.com, use the promo code TPP10 to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriots survival food. One more time, 4patriots.com, TPP10 at checkout. And again, like I always tell you, the best deal is the 3-month kit. So if you're going to use that code to get something, that is what I would recommend doing, and see what you get with the kit before you buy odds and ends. All right. That's my consumer protection message of the day. All right. So here we are. 4patriots.com, promo code TPP10, Laura. I'm just busting your chops. I can hear you get your handful. So look, if John's ready to come in, I'd actually like to bring him in now because he wrote this article, and of course the Trump indictment is a big story. Of course we have to talk about it, but I agree with Benny Johnson that there's a lot going on that they don't want us talking about at this current moment in time. I mean, without a doubt, there's still massive problems. What happened with Silicon Valley Bank? Talk about the canary in the coal mine. The Wall Street Journal last week reported that there were 180 plus banks in similar positions in similar positions as Silicon Valley Bank. And let me know, Laura, if he's ready to rock and roll. If he is, then I'd love to bring him in. But as this is all going on, we're not paying attention to the Fed floating these banksters while small banks bleed. And by the way, you're getting hammered still, because I want to read something that John wrote here. All right. And he does bring up the woke stuff without a doubt, because the investments that were being made, they were not diverse. And again, this is my point. If you staff your company with a bunch of fanatics, right, who put ideology over reality, and they put box checking over resumes, then something like this could happen. All right, Signature Bank, same thing. We got Barney Frank on the board of directors. That's just like basically a signal. We have Mr. Bank bailout on the team. Don't worry, we're a sound investment. No one will let us fail. And while he brings that stuff up, he says it's not to suggest the bank, went woke and got broke, because it is more complicated than that, as I wrote my own article. No, the clear culprit is the Biden administration's inflationary action through its war on U.S. energy and prolific deficit spending when the economy did not need further stimulation. But when all hands were needed on deck to navigate this troubling scenario, the management and board were too obsessed virtue signaling to actually attend to the business of the bank, and regulators were conspicuously absent in actually enforcing existing regulations. It seems that the two-tiered system between Republicans and Democrats does not just extend to the justice system. Folks, this issue of regulators, and you've heard me talk about it before, this is one of the issues, the biggest issues. For crying out loud, I keep using them as an example because it's almost too incredible to believe. When the SEC believed that they may have uncovered a smaller Ponzi scheme, they called Bernie Madoff for advice. They frequently picked up the phone or set a meeting with Bernie Madoff to discuss what would be appropriate actions to take in some of these cases. It's incredible. The incestuous relationship between these regulators and the big businesses that they are supposed to be overseeing is disgusting. It's SEC, it's the FDA, it's everywhere. All right, why would you police Big Pharma if you intend to get your government pension, right? Put that in the bank and then go and work for them. It's a bad system. There needs complete reform here. All right, let me bring in my friend and guest, John O'Shea. John, I'm so glad you're ready to rock, brother. I'm so glad you joined us today. This is excellent.
Oh, thanks, Rich. It's good to see you, and my love to Laura. I'm going to have to ask her for some coaching advice again here sometime in the future.
She just laughed. She's got you as always, John. She's got you know, I really felt like you were reading my mind when I was reading this, you know, because this is more than, and I even, of course, I criticize the woke, go woke, go broke.
Sure.
I see that side. I see that angle, John, because when something happens, you really need the best people there. Well, you need the best people to prevent things like this from happening. But, you know, inevitably markets and industries have unexpected turns. There are unpredictable events that happen. You don't want somebody that agrees with you on some ideology, or you don't want some person on a I think Jack Posobiec defines wokeism really good. You don't want them on this like vendetta to make society more fair in their eyes. You want people who know how to do their job correctly. That company should have been diverse. That company should have been, and it wasn't, because they don't give a damn about diversification. They care about diversity. I mean, it's crazy. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. As I think I've shared with you, I had a 20-year career in banking, and in fact was the president of a bank. And, everybody on the board, over 50% had prior bank experience, and those who didn't either had some ties to industry or community, or, had some kind of financial knowledge as well. We didn't tout our directors' racial makeup, what their sexual orientation was, why that's even appropriate. And this bank did. That was something that was important to them. And, at the end of the day, if you're an investor in a bank or if you're a customer of a bank, what you want to know is that the people there are going to be looking out for the shareholders and looking out for the customers. And to me, it not only was that not their primary focus, it was anything but. If you go to their website previously, I mean, they were touting the fact that they had spent $73 million on Black Lives Matter and other social causes, that they had earmarked $5 billion that they were going to dedicate to environmental sustainability. And they touted, that they had an ESG score of an A. Well, great. Now, what does that mean to my dividend and return, and how safe are my deposits? That never even appeared in the conversation for them.
Yeah, and I should have teed that up when you came on, your experience, because you are the man to talk to. I want to read this, and I want to get your take on what you read. There are two paragraphs I really want to read, but I'm going to read one at a time here. And more insidiously, just how does the FDIC make up the large claim against its insurance funds, and what is going to occur? By assessing more fees to the banks who did not go under to replenish the fund. And how many really believe the banks are just going to incur these increased fees and not pass them on to their customers? No, the public should not be forced to bail out tech startups and investor capital, in many cases with affiliation to the Chinese Communist Party, which, by the way, I want to talk about in a second, when they were perfectly capable of taking out private insurance on the accounts over $250,000 and elected not to. And the first thing is the Chinese connection there. When I went through, there was a research firm, it's a bunch of journalists, that I was able to obtain a list of depositors at Silicon Valley Bank.
Right.
The money from the Chinese, John, is astonishing. And this, the big money is, Mitt Romney's out there tweeting at the time, the day I get that document, Mitt Romney's out there saying, well, we got to make sure your employers can pay their payroll tax. No, Mitt. You care about the Chinese Alliance Fund. You care about the Chinese Alliance Fund 1 and 2. Yeah. I mean, John, this is so, again, we're going to punish people who don't deserve it, right? Isn't that your point?
I mean, it's every time. I mean, I can't get over this. We literally let these oligarchs take this risky behavior, and we privatize the upside on those gains. But, whenever there's a scandal or a fallout, or they get wiped out because their plots were just crazy to begin with, well, then we go ahead and we take those losses and we make them public. And it's not fair. The average American taxpayer did not do anything to incur this failure, nor did they have any ups on the positive side. The whole handling of this thing, even from the very inception, one of the basic things of banking is that you diversify your risk. Well, this whole bank's raison d'etre was to cater to tech startups. I can't think of a more risky venture to lend into. And then the examiners being asleep at the wheel. When this bank had grown almost 400% over the last 4 years, I can tell you from firsthand experience, that would have gotten you a phone call at the very minimum the first time that you had some kind of explosive growth, and it would have gotten you an unscheduled exam afterwards. So it's just everybody was asleep at the wheel here, and yet it's going to be the deplorables. It's going to be us that are going to end up bailing this out, and the wealthy people and the Chinese communist affiliated money are going to skate off made whole. And in fact, the thing that I think is most scandalous about this is that by the FDIC coming in and insuring all the deposits, well, then that claim isn't on the liquidation of the assets. So there's actually a chance that the lenders and the investors in this bank get out with some portion of their money anyway, and they should have been wiped out bar none. I mean, they should have been the first buffer of losses.
Well, that's what, before I go on to the next paragraph, I got to bring that up because you touched on something. When you were in the business, when you were in the industry years ago, and I'm getting old now, it sucks, but looking back, even when we, there were IPOs, whatever, tech is obviously risky. It's like Econ 101, investing 101, these principles are being ignored. Diversification is the first lesson you learn. And then again, you said, I would have gotten a call if something like this had exploded in value like that. Where the hell are these people, John? What are they doing? What happened? Because this would never have, same thing. I immediately thought myself, this would never have happened without a phone call. Never. I mean, I just don't understand. What are they doing?
Well, the last bank I actually ran, I went and specifically sought out that opportunity because it was in trouble. So for those of you who don't know, the regulators actually have a scoring system. It's called a CAMEL score, and it measures capital, assets, management, earnings, liquidity, and systems. And they give you a grade of 1 to 5. A 1, you're probably not taking enough risk, and so you're probably not making enough money. 2, you're hunky-dory. You'll see the examiners every couple of years. A 3, they're sniffing around all the time. And the bank I went to go run was a 3, and they were under a memorandum of understanding, and they had been for 3 years. And so part of what we had to do was clean up the investment policy, the investment portfolio. We had to do a number of things. And it was a $200 million bank, not a $200 billion bank. And I can tell you, when we took a look at buying or selling securities, we ran portfolio analysis and we ran shock scenarios to look at what happens if interest rates go 100 basis points or 300 basis points, which in fact is what happened here today. And I know the examiners knew this. Do you know how I know the examiners knew it? Because here's their reports off of their website. This is off the FDIC website. It's a uniform peer bank report. And they measure all these things down to the ratios and the analysis. I mean, it says here in 2018, the bank went from 54 billion in size to 203 billion. That's insane growth. I mean, they don't let any financial institution grow like that. But to your point previously about the shareholders, take a look at in the depositors, look at who were depositors there, the Obamas, Oprah Winfrey, Schumer. I mean, so do you think that, and the board, you mentioning Frank, I mean, do you think the examiners were really going to pay very close attention, or if they had actual concerns, were actually going to voice them? I mean, the same Treasury Department that was calling inflationary transitory was actually going to shine the light and bring the real rules and regulations on this. Because I've heard people on the Democrat side try and turn this around and say this was the deregulation of the banks under the Trump administration. And I'm here to tell you, no, just following the basic rules and doing the basic blocking and tackling would have prevented this scenario from the very get-go. If you have a second, I kind of would like to walk the reader or the viewer through this a little bit, because sometimes we try and make this sound nebulous, not us, you and I, but, a lot of the talking head pundits are like, well, banking's this big black box and, you unadulterated, unwashed masses could never comprehend it. But it's really simple. At the end of the day, a bank, what they do is they take in deposits and then they loan it out or make investments. So whereas my concrete company, for example, our assets are what we use to make money. And so it's in, sand and gravel and cement. It's in accounts receivable. It's in the mixer trucks and the land and the plant. And then our liabilities are our accounts payable, loans to the banks, and then we have the equity. Well, here the liabilities of the bank are the deposits because they owe that money back to the public, and that's the whole reason why the FDIC comes in and examines these banks. And so when they had this huge slug of money come in because of all the excess liquidity and all the juicing that the Biden administration did, what did they do? They turned around and they bought 10-year treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, which are long-term. Well, guess what? You go put $1,000 in the bank, you can turn around tomorrow and withdraw it. Well, if the bank doesn't have the money because they tied it up all in long-term securities, what do you think is going to happen? So it was a failure to hedge interest rates, which is basic banking 101. It was unbelievable explosive growth to a very risky industry with hardly any portfolio diversification. And then it was a complete mismatching of their balance sheet. They took short-term assets or liabilities and they went long-term assets. And I mean, anybody could have seen this coming a mile away.
Yeah, and you when you're going through, because this will tee up the next paragraph, and by all means explain it, John, because it's not, and that's what we try to do on Inside the Numbers. It's not convoluted, so convoluted you cannot understand it, folks. You can. They don't want you to understand it because they want to have their narratives and they want to get away with whatever they want to get away with. You're perfectly capable of understanding how this works.
Sure. And American people are smart.
They're smart, John. Right, John. They're smart. They're busy, but they're smart. And the point is to explain it to them and lay it out for them in a way that anybody can understand this. This is the problem because I still get a lot of comments of why did inflation? What is the connection with inflation? So I guess you have to explain the relationship between bond prices and yields and why inflation impacts them. But I mean, at the end of the day, the real question I'm trying to ask here, at the end of the day, before we get into that, you mentioned the names of the depositors that were in this bank, John. I mean, so the regulator's not doing their job, which has nothing to do with Trump and deregulation. They absolutely could have seen this coming. Is this really just a case of having friends? I mean, that's it. So you got friends, you have it in front of you, you're looking at it.
Yeah.
So.
Right here. I mean, tell me if this bank was in Topeka, Kansas, if they would have come in. And on top of that, there's some really bizarre behavior here that I think needs explaining, because if you look at, so as you mentioned, inflation reduces the value of the securities, right? And when Trump left office, Biden got the perfect handoff. The 10-year treasury rate was 0.86%, so under 1%. And then through his inflationary juicing of the economy, and again, the war on energy. And I know he tries to blame Putin and the war in Ukraine, but that was just a cherry on top. He had already set the inferno on fire. But now it's over 4%. Well, then what happened was these bonds devalued immensely. But banks typically hold the securities to maturity. So there was no threat of that being actually an incurred loss unless there was a run on the bank. And the vast majority of these bonds were held in what was called held to maturity category, meaning that they weren't trading, they weren't actively buying, or they weren't selling these. For some reason, they went in and marked those to market. I don't understand why. And the other thing that's happening with banks all across the country, and why this bank didn't have happen, was that the banks are able to go and pledge these securities. So all of a sudden there's a run on the bank, people get panicked and they're worried about their deposits. Well, they can take those securities and go pledge them at the Fed discount window, which is kind of like the lender of last resort for banks, and they can borrow 100 cents on the dollar. Why didn't that happen here either? This whole thing, like everything that's occurred over the last 2+ years, all of this is completely manufactured crises. I've never seen an administration more purposefully misstep over and over and over again.
Demon of our own design. I told when this started to happen, I don't know if you've ever read that, but when this started to happen, I just immediately started telling the audience, if you haven't read Richard Bookstaber, Demon of Our Own Design, it gets to the heart of what John is talking about. And this happens over and over, which is the point of the book. That's the worst of it. It happens over and over. And these regulators, it's at this point we need, and I'll get into what you think we need, but where do we go from here? I just want to read this other paragraph because this is unfortunately part of that discussion. Most egregiously, the working and middle classes of this country are going to be paying for this bailout in another manner as well. The Federal Reserve has been focused primarily on fighting the rampant inflation that has seen real workers' wages, the amount they earn, less inflation, decreased for 2 straight years now, something never before seen in the history of this country. And by the way, we have never seen back-to-back over a 2-day period bank failures like that came in at the top 5. That has never happened either.
Well, it was number 2 and number 3.
That's right. And so now, at a time when people are dealing with double-digit inflation in the prices of the most essential items to live, like gas, groceries, and utilities, the Fed has to take a pause and weigh the cost of fighting inflation versus the further pressure that rate hikes will place on struggling banks. If history is any indication, the Fed will fall on the side of the ruling class oligarchs and screw the average American yet once again. Man, because there really is no other play here. They're going to do that. But, well, there are, though. There are other moves. It's just that, for the Fed, they're a one-trick pony. So they have that very singular choice. What they're choosing to do here, John, what do you think? I mean, they're trying to stabilize the situation. That article in the Wall Street Journal last week, there are 180 plus banks that are in the same position. This is a disaster. So, of course, you knew they were going to take this action, but because you were right. You were 100% correct with that's their instinct. What do you think is the way out here, John? This is not an easy out. It's not.
The time for easy answers are over. I mean, you can't just keep spending over and over and over again. And look, the national debt's up to $31.4 trillion, right? What do we have to show for it? I mean, do we see brand new shiny infrastructure and all kinds of booming industry and economy going on as a result of all this? No, what we see is the funding of all these woke programs that are then turned around and weaponized against us. Like the doubling of the IRS department so they can go audit the wages of, waiters and waitresses. I mean, yeah, that's really going to help us out of this. And then to make matters worse, knowing that there was getting ready to be a showdown between the House Republicans, those scary MAGA type that Biden keeps, talking about, because they know they're up against a debt limit. Basically, the credit card's maxed out, and they're asking for an extension of the credit card limit. And so they say, hey, Biden, we need to see your budget. What's your budget proposal? Well, he comes back in with a budget of $6.8 trillion just to show how serious he thinks the matter really is. Over $1 trillion more than the budget for last year. So, you and I can sit here and talk about this, but it seems that the people who think that there are betters up in Washington, D.C., this is a game to them. They don't see there's any real dire consequences in this. So, I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to look at who our elected leaders are. God bless the 20 congressmen and women who actually held Kevin McCarthy's feet to the fire and kind of made him accountable. And I'll say it, Kevin McCarthy has actually been the most conservative House Speaker in his very short tenure since, Newt Gingrich. So, I mean,
got to give credit where it's due, John. You got to give credit where it's due.
Oh, yeah. Hey, look, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't sure that he could step up to the occasion, but he actually has very impressed me. And not that he's auditioning for me, but I think he's impressed all my friends as well. And I think, we're like, hey, you know what? You actually have a pretty good backbone here when you know that you have people who've got your back and you're actually having to rule a coalition government. But the first thing we've got to look at is we've got to look at getting these unserious people out of office. And we've got to make our message be known that if you don't get this deficit spending under control, if you don't fight off inflation so that the working class and middle class people who are getting crushed actually have something to work for and can get ahead as opposed to being on the hamster wheel for the last 2 years and earning less and less and less, if you don't do those things, we're going to hold you accountable. It's time for people to actually, unfortunately, take time away from their busy lives and pay attention to this, because until we start holding accountable, until we start writing letters, until we start calling them and letting them know and voice our displeasure, nothing's going to change. I mean, to them, it's just a game right now. And Biden's going to continue to push for student debt forgiveness because, and more money to Ukraine, because those are the matters that really are important to the average American citizen.
This is where you went, right where I was going to go, because you really said it. I mean, it does start with these leaders. And I'll even bring you in on this segment because I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But some of this stuff with these leaders, it is generational. They're not taking it seriously. I mean, I'm looking at Biden. It's not just his age, it's his generation. He is he's very indicative of that mindset. Basically, I really sit and wonder, don't they think about their families? Yes, they're old and they're not going to have to deal with this stuff, but don't they think about their families, or do they think they're going to be isolated from this? You have John Cornyn attacking the editor of the Federalist yesterday. You saw that, right? Attacking the editor of the Federalist. Why? Because he was voicing the opinion of the vast majority of Americans. Are you out of your mind with this money to Ukraine and this rallying cry? This is nuts. All right. The wars, they're losing, John. I mean, we're losing this proxy war. As a year ago, I told everybody we would. Russia had seen this coming. They knew. And all we did was push China and Russia closer. It's the opposite of Nixon's détente. We've built a huge balancing coalition that we don't have the money or the military power to balance against. And they're just like laughing all the way to the bank. They're stuck in Munich. Cornyn is bringing up the lessons of Munich. Everywhere they look, they see Hitler, brother. Everywhere they look, it's unbelievable. I just don't think things can be changed with these people in office.
No, well, in fact, at least we have one good conservative Republican senator here in the state of Texas. I have to tell you,
you do.
I was actually at the state convention, and John Cornyn spoke right before my good friend Ken Paxton did, and he got booed off the stage. And Ken, who is actually no fan of John Cornyn's, I don't think I'm letting any cat out of the bag there. They've had kind of harsh words for each other in public, but actually had to kind of hand off the mic as he went by. And when I saw Ken afterwards, he said, I actually felt bad for him for a second. But
I'm telling you what, Ken oh, Laura, is that you? Oh, I thought Laura jumped in. Laura, Ken should run against Cornyn. Yeah, I'm serious. You should, well, I mean, you should not. I mean, he's going to do what he wants to do. But I believe Ken Paxton would thrash John Cornyn in a primary and then win the seat. I don't think Ken would be in any danger of giving that seat up to Democrats in Texas. Well, I mean, this doesn't have my point is, this doesn't have to be the case, people. You don't have to just settle for these people that you don't agree with. The media, when it came to Cornyn, it's a great example. The media gets on the voter and starts scaring the voter that if you were to replace somebody like John Cornyn, he's a known quantity in Texas. Everyone knows he can win. It could look at how close it was with Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. Basically, he's a Republican, and you should just settle and be happy with that. This is what comes of this. There's not going to be any change. There's not going to be a change of direction. He's never going to wake up one day. He's not going to suddenly wake up one day and say, you know what, I should probably represent my constituents. That's not going to happen. He's going to represent the people he's been representing for years. They're not in Texas. There's some, but it's K Street, it's Wall Street, it's the oligarchs in Ukraine. That's who they are. Donors. And the big donors.
It's... Well, there's a lot to unpack in all of that. I do. I sit there and I wonder, how do these people sleep at night, knowing what the havoc that they're not wreaking just on the people here who are struggling to get by, but think of what we're leaving to our kids and our grandkids. They don't worry about it for themselves because they're creating generational wealth, how they're getting that kind of generational wealth serving in Congress or in the Senate for all those years, because while they get paid well, they don't get paid well enough to rack up a Nancy Pelosi type portfolio. But, I can't believe, and it's in just about every single aspect of every single scandal that we're facing, is that they're showing a propensity to sell us out, to sell out this country,
always,
to fatten their own wallet. I mean, look at Fauci and look at the whole Pfizer imbroglio and what they knew before they, started shoving the vaccine, and the fact that we were funding the research for it. And I mean, it's just every single situation that you look at, all you have to do is follow the money, because it seems like they're purely being, you even brought up the Chinese Communist Party deposits over at Silicon Valley Bank. Well, we know, I'm tired of playing pretend. We know that they have co-opted a large swath of this country. They're in the universities. They're in the tech companies. They're in our government. I mean, they're doing all kinds of things to subvert us. And it's not a coincidence that, we cater to them when they actually, by their own proclamation, are waging unrestricted warfare against us. And, this whole situation with Ukraine and with, this vitriol hatred towards Putin, which I ironically always troll the Democrats when they start talking about, Trump's friend Putin. I say, well, who's the only president in the 21st century that Putin didn't invade a neighboring country during? It was Trump's administration.
Donald John Trump. That's right.
These people have been there for decades, and this is where they have brought us. And, that whole situation in Ukraine and with the war that Cornyn was speaking about, you have to wonder why our interests are so intense in Ukraine and why the hatred towards Putin so much. You know as well as I do that that's a fairly complex situation. They like to take the simple things like what is a man and what is a woman and make them very complex. And they like to take a complex thing like what actually led up to the invasion in Ukraine, because they keep calling it unprovoked, and it was anything but unprovoked over the last, since 2014. So now 9 years. So, I mean, again, you could have seen this one coming a mile away. But I think a lot of that vitriol and hatred towards Putin is because he prevented our ruling oligarchs from going and taking Russia and turning it into a Ukraine 2.0, and that they would have used it as their corrupt money bank and money laundering operation as well, but for the rise of Putin and his strong national populism over there.
For people who don't know what John's talking about, definitely after the fall of the Soviet Union, moving into the 21st century, there was an opportunity to bring Russia, and people argued for bringing Russia into NATO. And people had literally made that case, but Putin rose, and very contradictory to what you hear in Western media, he did not rise on let's rebuild the Soviet Union. That was not his pitch at all. Read his thesis. Think for yourself. Putin couldn't stand how the Bolsheviks put the interests of the ideology, above the interests of the Russian people. So he is not actually, if we're reading The Tragedy of Great Power Politics right now on our book club.
Yeah, on your book club, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, by, most INR security studies definitions, Putin is not an expansionist at all. No. He's relatively, I don't want to use the word meek, but he is not, he has not taken opportunities to expand like we saw the Soviet Union do when they could in the 20th century, especially Stalin, So this very, very, very different leader here. Yet we're supposed to think he's like trying to reconstitute the USSR. But Putin rose and prevented them from basically raping and pillaging what remained of the Russian Federation, or what was now is the Russian Federation. What I worry about, John, is that they're going to push Putin so much here that he's going, because leaders have to make calculations. Did I get enough ROI? Did I get a return on my investment here? If they keep this up, man, and he expends more resources than he wanted to, more men than he wanted to, then he will take more, because he'll have to make it worth it. Instead, as of right now, he just wants these Eastern Europe. He's already in control of most of the shale deposits, most agriculture. He's got everything that the Western elites, after they pushed and backed a coup of a democratically elected government.
Revolt. Yeah,
that's right. After they put a lot of money into that country, man, and they wanted that stuff. That was, Biden gave a speech in 14 after that happened, or 15, excuse me. And, it's still on the State Department website to this day. He went over because he was the point man for U.S.-Ukraine relations. And he said, look, we're going to give you this $1 billion+ package, but you're going to put it in those shale deposits. What do you think the point of that was? And then, by the way, his son just happens to be, with one of the biggest energy companies in the area. I mean,
now don't be spouting Russian disinformation there, Rich. You know what the experts are saying. So,
you know what, you Putin puppet? I hear this all the time. We hear this, John. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you know what? At the risk of being called a Putin shill, well, guess what? So he stepped into a situation where you had corrupt oligarchs, kind of running the country as their personal fiefdom as well. Crime was out of control. Unemployment was up. Inflation was up. The country was in bad shape. And all he's done, if you look, they have balanced balanced budget. They actually have gold reserves. He reinvested in manufacturing in the country, kind of bringing stuff back on shore and building up their capabilities there. He has huge food production. He's energy independent. In fact, big energy exporter. So, he's kept unemployment low and inflation in check. So you take the name away from it and say, hey, this is the leader of this country. I'd say sign me up. I mean, and back to your other point, it is insane what this administration is doing here. You've rightly pointed out, we've pulled a reverse Kissinger. We've actually pushed Russia into the arms of China, which, great. Now we have the world's largest producer of food and natural resources, coupled with the world's largest manufacturing base. Who could see anything going wrong there? But then they're actually now going around and recruiting their other allies. They're, getting Saudi Arabia and Iran in to start selling oil to China and accept the yuan as payment so we could destabilize the dollar further and actually remove the US dollar as the global reserve currency. You've got Turkey dealing with these people. Heck, even Israel's on friendly relationships with Russia. And now India's increasing their trade with them. So what we're effectively doing in the West is kind of uniting the rest of the world against us, who are wondering, why are we paying such crazy attention to the situation in Ukraine? And rather than trying to de-escalate it and bring about peace, we're further escalating and we're throwing more and more fuel on the fire. It's almost as if we're willing to try and grind down Putin to the very last man, woman, and child in Ukraine. And to me, that's a moral travesty, and it's completely unjustifiable. And Cornyn ought to be ashamed of himself.
I mean, they are, it's like living in another world. They are seriously, or were before the disaster for them at Bakhmut, they were seriously gearing up to push Zelensky into an offensive in the Crimea. These people are delusional, John. They're completely delusional. I got to ask you a question. It's something that my audience has been kicking around for a while, and the banking issues arose and it became a more prominent conversation. What would go in, because I don't even know how to answer this. It's beyond my expertise. What would go into a major reform that would change monetary policy in this country to be from a centralized bank to state-specific monetary policy with their own currencies? What would go into something like that? And would it be, theoretically, a more sound system?
Well, there was a time before the greenback where every state had their own currency. And we know that there's a very active debate on whether or not we actually benefit by having a Federal Reserve banking system at all. So my vote right now is, or opinion is, no, we don't. I mean, in fact, look at how they've just magically created money out of thin air when all of a sudden we're deficit spending. And there's nobody around the world now willing to buy our bonds or treasuries. And so what does the Fed do? They just push a button, call up one of their 24 agent banks, and boom, magically buy securities and create $1 billion drop of a hat. When Trump was in office, one of the things that he didn't get credit for was he actually started practicing monetary constriction. So trying to sop up some of this excess liquidity. It's been basically the punch, keeping the party going when there really wasn't the core efficiencies and the economic factors really fueling our growth. It was really just zero interest rates at the cost of, John Q. Public and people on fixed incomes and net savers. But, Biden turned around, like everything else Trump did. He turned around and not just reversed it, but reversed it, put the pedal to the metal to where we went from like $3.5 trillion on the Federal Reserve balance sheet to now like $9 trillion. Well, okay, so you jump that kind of money into our monetary supply. What do you think is going to happen? I mean,
consequences. They don't think there are any consequences. It's very simple. We were talking about the public being able to understand this stuff. It's very simple, folks. If there is more of something, it is worth less. It is 100%. Very simple, supply and demand. You increase the money supply, you devalue it, and obviously it's the root cause of inflation. It is the root cause of inflation. They just thought that the CARES Act, after Trump left from the pandemic, was, their green light, John, to be real reckless. And I did not support the CARES Act when Trump signed it at all. I did not like it in the least. And why? I don't know, Robert Higgs, the Crisis in Leviathan, you let them do something like that, they will do it forever. They never relent. And what did Biden do the minute he got in? Another CARES package, CARES Act 2.0, filled with left-wing goodies that had nothing to do with the pandemic, refunding states for reopening schools, even though Trump already funded it. The recklessness is astonishing. I don't know if I can go back, and I know you like history too, in any period of civilization where I could see a supposed superpower or hegemonic power acting so recklessly. Because when hegemons go down, the world usually goes down with it, or at least it's very tumultuous. So it's not like it's when, that we're supposed to care so much about the human condition around the world, and they're not considering, John, what it would mean to so many people around the world if we did collapse. I mean, we're not exempt from the rules of history, and these people think we are.
No, well, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a more kind of crisis type situation in my life before, with every aspect of our country, with the border, with drug overdoses, with our education system, with foreign policy, with the economy, with monetary policy. I mean, honestly, at least a broken clock is right twice a day. So I kind of can't believe that he's this incompetent. And oh, by the way, don't forget, he couldn't have done the economic stimulus packages without the collaborator Republicans in the Senate as well. So we've got some blame as well. We really need to do a house cleaning. And back to the Cornyn situation, I have it on very good authority that he's going to get primaried if he decides to run again. And there are going to be a couple of good contenders in there that will be a true conservative voice for Texas. But we need to see that all across the country. Frankly, there are too many people in office right now who've been there for decades. And what we don't need is a career ruling class of politicians. This country belongs to us, and yet they seem to routinely forget that over and over and over again. And one thing that I was struck about just recently, I think you've seen that podcast, The Duran, and it's always interesting to me to see. Kind of European positions on kind of what's taking place in the U.S. And they were talking about Macron and the Yellow Vest revolt because he was trying to get the pension reformed. And rather than follow the normal course through the government, he was actually just ramming it through executive decree, something I'm sure he learned from Biden. But I don't know that I've ever seen the West from top to bottom being ruled by people who actually actively act like they despise their country and the people of their country. I mean, I can't think of one Western leader right now who I say, well, that's a true patriot who really cares about his country. I mean, do we think that Biden does as he's out there lecturing us? No. I mean, he goes and gives his State of the Union address, and it sounded like he took a page out of Trump's playbook talking about the average American person. And then what does he do on President's Day when there's the train derailment and then the burning of the hazardous materials, which created an ecological nightmare, again, a self-made disaster? Does he show up at East Palestine to go comfort those people and pay attention to the actual, working class people and show compassion? No, he shows up in Kiev to go get a report card and go dole out some more money to people who are fighting a losing war and are dying as a consequence of it. I just, if you can point to me one Western, the only person I can think of right now is maybe Viktor Orban, because he's a national populist. But just about every other leader in the West right now, I don't know since Jacinda Ardern, left, what that situation is, but, she was a prime example. I mean, just authoritarian, vicious lockdown person and her people be damned.
It's funny you say that, because it's like you look back at some of these big major figures, Margaret Thatcher, and then of course Reagan, came a little bit later, and they had such a great relationship. And when you look at leaders like that, and Trump, by the way, was very much like this. Your job is to be a consoler in chief. To not go to Ohio after that happened is just egregious. Unbelievable. It's egregious. Your job as president is to make the American people feel safe, to console them when they need to be consoled. You look, even presidents I particularly didn't like, did great jobs at that. Roosevelt was very good at that. But Thatcher, she loved her country. She loved it and she believed in it, and you could see it. And that inspires people, John. And that's the magic of people like her, Reagan, even Trump. If they believe in their country, then they just kind of get out of the way, give them the confidence, the tone from the top that they need to go out and do their thing. Be strong, build strong communities, build strong family units. This is absent now. This is totally absent. And you said it before, and I know they'll clip this and, put Putin Pup, hashtag Putin Puppet on it. But
I don't care what they call me.
You said it before, brother. You really did. If you just took Putin's name off, blindfolded somebody, and just gave them a list of what Putin has done, and Robert Barnes and I, over a year ago, when this, was all brewing, Biden said, well, we're going to destroy their currency. They did nothing. It was a temporary 48-hour disruption to their currency, and then it stabilized because Putin had put all of these actions in place. Inflation is always stable for them. We went over different periods of sanctions after Georgia, after 14, 15. None of this ever worked because Putin insulated his country, knowing that eventually he would become the West straw man and the boogeyman, really. And if it was, at least he believes in his country, at least he believes in his country. And he himself obviously is a nationalist. That is missing from the West. And they hate nationalism, John. They hate it.
I don't. Well, you know why? It's because they're authoritarian to their core. And there's the three bulwarks against authoritarianism. It's love of country, love of God, love of family. And all three of these things, it's not missed on most that all three of those things are under attack. I mean, the fact that we actually had churches locked down during COVID at a time when people were in the spiritual crisis and they were just pushing out the fear porn. Schools were locked down, businesses were locked down, and they want to break people's will. I don't think they love this country. In fact, if anything, I think they're in it for themselves, and it's all trying to sell their country out, and make as much money and grab as much silverware as they can on the way out the door. I mean, it's just their behavior shows it over and over and over again. And you mentioned Trump, and God bless President Trump, because he took more slings and arrows than I've ever seen anybody in his lifetime. But nobody questioned his love of this country. I mean, he didn't need it. And,
guys on the stage hugging flags, even though we all know he hates germs. He's on the stage hugging flags, John. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's just like a routine thing for him. When was the last time you saw a president hug a flag on a stage? I mean,
I mean, again, you can criticize his mannerisms or his, if you call him bombastic or say that he's egotistical or whatever. Look, I think you have to be somewhat of a narcissist to be able to run for public office to begin with. But
me too.
But nobody can question his true love of this country and wanting to see the average American person being considered in everything that was being decided. The dichotomy of where we were in 2019 when I got back from South America and the dichotomy where we are now, I honestly don't know, Rich, if this country can take 2 more years of this feckless administration, and especially with these Republican collaborators who seem intent on just watching it all burn. I don't know that we'll be able to make it to the 2024 election. It's just, I don't think I've ever seen things go this hard and fast in one direction, and it seems like it's intentional.
I don't want to be Johnny Raincloud, but I have never in my lifetime ever had the view, never during Obama, never during Bush, never during Clinton. I actually thought, back then was pretty good president, or at least because he listened, not because I agreed with everything, but he listened. And he wasn't reckless or careless at all. Not like that. Not like now.
Personally, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, personally, but right. Not with the survival of the country. And in the first time in my adult life, I am now thinking exactly like you. I'm wondering how much sand is really left in this hourglass. This just happened for people who are living with this false sense of security. Silicon Valley Bank should have been a wake-up call to you. Right. Signature Bank 2 days later, March 10th, March 12th, or 12th, 14th. I might have that backward. But, this is something I'm starting to lean more towards, like Ed Dowd, who called this, by the way, called it last year. He said, by March, April, there's going to be a couple of major bank collapses, and that's going to, we're going to have a catalyst, give it another year. We're looking at a major kinetic war. I really just, I hate to say it. I almost feel like there has to be some big disruption, some big failure before things can change, or at least at this rate. And I'm really praying that there are some adults, that we can hold out. until there are adults. And I mean on both sides. I mean, unfortunately, it would have to be that for it to work, but maybe not. And I'm getting less and less optimistic, John. I am. Even I hate to say it.
No, I know. I mean, hey, look, it sounds hyperbolic to say repeatedly that this is going to be, the biggest round of elections in our lifetime. But, gosh, if this isn't true in this scenario, I don't know what it is. And you're right. We need to make significant changes. It doesn't need to just be, we need to, have a red wave and take back the Senate. No, it's got to be the right senators, and it's got to be the right House of Representatives. We need more than just those brave 20 who are willing to take the slings and arrows and even take the criticism from their own party. I mean, look at Dan Crenshaw was calling them domestic terrorists.
Yes.
And I mean, I had such high hopes for him, and before I found out that he was part of the World Economic Forum Youth Leadership Group. But we need
but it's like these signs, John.
Yeah.
It's these signs that reoccur all the time. They come in, they're super conservative, they're this, they're against that, sound monetary policy, whatever it may be. But there are always these little signs, the connection to this group, a connection to that. And it's amazing how well some of these people can act, right? So you can't really blame the voter. The voter doesn't have the time to constantly watch a politician to see whether or not they're being earnest and they're being authentic. And then they get in and Dan Crenshaw is a perfect example. I mean, Adam Kinzinger is up there pushing this guy he claims is doing, work on the ground in Ukraine. And it was just constant war propaganda. Don't listen to Putin's media. The Ukrainians are winning. Just found out he just canceled his account. The guy was a total fake. And Adam Kinzinger is out there pushing him. Adam Kinzinger, if you rewind the clock, ran and won as somebody who was supposed to be this super conservative veteran. Look at him now. I mean, it's incredible, the about faces, John. It has to be the right people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, right now, I'm taking a look at everybody that's in the House in Texas and kind of trying to do my own personal assessment. Because you're right. I mean, it's easy for people to give these sound clips and, God, family, country, and everybody goes, oh, wow, okay, they're a real true Republican conservative. But here we actually have people who run as Republicans, and they're not Republicans. They're actually Democrats. I'm not just talking about they're not conservative enough for my liking. I mean, they actually had a history of voting in the Democrat elections and were known Democrats and then changed party affiliation so they could get elected here.
That's so true. And there are more of them than I think people realize. There really are.
Yeah, look at a current chairwoman of appropriations right now, the most powerful woman in Congress. My own state representative, Kay Granger. I mean, she was a Democrat mayor. Yeah, all of a sudden she had an ideological change. I mean, maybe she flip-flopped. I know she was pro-choice, and now she's pro-life. I know she was, pro-Jeb Bush, and then she was pro-Trump, and then she was anti-Trump again. So I don't know. Maybe she truly changed, or if you take a look at her voting record, maybe did she never really change, and she just kind of changed the initial behind her name.
She's wearing a mask. That's all. Yep. I mean, and that's, by the way, Kay is a perfect example of this permanent fixture, this permanent ruling class. I mean, at what point do you say, okay, it's time to move, step aside and make room for new blood? At what point do you really just realize that yourself? But that's not what it's about anymore, John. It's about and this is why I can't stand the 17th Amendment, because the log rolling deal with the 16th and 17th Amendment was like the beginning of the end of public service. I became political careerists.
Professional politicians. Yep.
That's exactly right. And you know what? I would give my vote up for senator in a heartbeat to go back to the original design. I will vote for my state legislators, and they can decide who is and who is not representing the interests of the states. I'm okay with that because they get in. K Street doesn't want to bankroll a new person every year. They buy someone who stays and is a permanent fixture. And unfortunately, once they did it with the Senate, it became the culture of the House as well. And you get people like Kay Granger.
Yep. No, I agree. It's funny. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene gets, flack all the time because she's very outspoken. But hey, she was a concerned private citizen, a businesswoman who ran her own operation, and she decided she was going to do something about it. Just think of what kind of change we could affect if we got another 20 or 30 other people who are true patriots that love this country so much that they were willing to put it all on the line to go actually be a servant. It's funny. This is something I've been giving a lot of thought to as of late because, there are a lot of very troubling signs about what's going on in the country, and it's not a coincidence that the chapter or the book in the Bible that I've been reading lately is Revelation again, because there's just way too much occurring right now for my liking. But
go ahead. I was just going to.
I was just going to say, I mean, what Jesus told us was that, when he was challenged by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the legal scholar tried to trip him up and say, what's the most important of the commandments? And he said to love God with all your heart, your mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's right. We need some more people who are willing to love their neighbors here, and really not look at their own personal enrichment, but maybe look at kind of something more material of consequence, like maybe their very soul. I don't understand it. I don't get these people. I don't know how they sleep at night. I don't know how they can live with the country that they're getting ready to leave to the kids and the grandkids. I mean, right now, our national debt, which, again, Biden's getting ready to go in there to go push the debt ceiling limit up. We owe $250,000 per U.S. household as it is. And again, I'll harken back to the point. What do we have to show for that money? How do we think we're going to get any better return on this new woke spending that he's going to propose?
Or a declining hegemon. That's what we got for all of this money. And I'm not saying it can't be reversed. It's just looking at one of the comments. They said, that they share the same fears as you. I don't think we make it to 24 without something tipping over. They're using it as their Reichstag fire moment. That's what, and I got to tell you, and Laura said, preach it, because really, and some people just hate when you bring religion into it. But the fact of the matter is, this country was designed, the social contract was designed for people of faith, religion, and morality, and virtue, right? That's what these people are obsessed with, the pursuit of virtue. Religion and morality are indispensable supports. George Washington, this is founded on, Laura said, right? Founded by and founded on these principles. And we really, sadly, I think a lot of this comes down to what you just said. I had a pastor, Andy Stanley, which a lot of people probably know, is big. The rise of the nuns. He's been on this forever. And he blames in large part the church because of how we've been made some terrible decisions. And that's absolutely true. But with the rise of the nuns comes this change. It's more than just a change to our culture and our values. It will change how the state itself is governed and the strength of the state. And we just did this, same thing with the rise in tech. All of this happened without a national discourse or any kind of discussion over what may be the final product here if we undergo that kind of change. And reading back how in the New York Times, of all place, basically saying what makes America strong. It's some little something a lot of people don't know called the ethic, and that came from the religious principles that our founders had. And it didn't matter if you were Catholic, Protestant. You adapted the ethic, the Protestant ethic. And that's what made us strong. While Europe looked at us like barbarians and we worked too hard, right? They were weak and we were strong. And unfortunately, you want to emulate that, then you can't expect that you're going to get the rewards. What you got was 30 trillion in debt and nothing to show for it. A declining quality of life. That's what you got.
A big IOU. Yeah. To Laura's point, I know the whole separation of church and state is often misapplied, but to your point, there was never our founding fathers, as imperfect as they might be, because guess what? There was only one perfect person who walked the face of the earth, and that was the Messiah. So I think he was the exception.
They're held to a ridiculous standard, John.
So even though they were people of their time, and at their own times, they were very virtuous people and very God-fearing people, they intended this country. They knew a republic, if we could keep it, only if it was a virtuous people that the government was residing over and was constituting the government. There was never an intention to remove religion from the government. It was to keep government out of our religion. And unfortunately, I think we need to inject God back into everything. I had a conversation with my friend Terry Schilling from the American Principles Project, and he was celebrating a couple of the wins on protecting family rights and, protecting kids from being, affirmative care and actually having mutilating surgery before they're, of legal age of 18, and the sexualization of our kids. And while I was congratulatory to him about it, just the fact of the matter that these are things that we shouldn't be taking kids to drag shows. It makes me profoundly sad. And I get that it's this kind of woke progressive thing to say, well, look at how enlightened I am. Well, okay. Does anybody think that it would be a good idea for me to take my 7 or 8-year-old boy to a gentleman's club? No, of course not, because we understood you're supposed to protect your kids, protect the family. Government wasn't supposed to tell the parents what they were supposed to do. And yet we've got it all backwards. So I mean, back to Laura's point, I think we need to get a real grounding in God and in a hurry.
Yeah, man, preach it, brother. That's all I have to say. I mean, there's always been Laura and I's, position. Look, even if I don't agree with it, I mean, people have a right to live the life that they want to live,
Sure.
but I wouldn't expose them to any sexuality like that. I mean, so it's inappropriate. They're too young. It doesn't. And here she is. It doesn't matter if it's LBGTQRSTUV. I can't even remember all the names. You're not enlightened because you're showing children things that you wouldn't show them if it was heterosexual activity.
100%.
It's just inappropriate. And
Right.
and this is go ahead, Laura. I'll let you say what you got to say before I let John go.
I
You better come
just
back,
wanna
John. You
reiterate
better
what
come back.
John was saying. Like, these children are making sex change decisions. They can't even vote. So the whole, as a society, knows these children can't vote for a president.
Drink a beer.
but
buy
they
a pack
can
of
decide
cigarettes.
that they're going to change their whole sexual nature.
Look, I had a kid who thought she was a Care Bear for a period of time, and I didn't go run out and get surgery to have, fuzzy ears attached to her head. I mean, just the idea that we're letting kids make these kind of life-changing decisions when their brains are not fully formed and developed yet. I mean, honestly, if people wanted to raise the legal age of majority to 21, I think you could make a valid argument for it, because in some kids, especially with kids on the spectrum, and let's face it, we have a growing pandemic of autism in this country, and nobody wants to get to the root of what's actually happening there. But the research suggests that those brains develop at an even slower clip, and that they're not fully mature and cognitive in their thinking until they're in their mid to late 20s. And so we're going to let some 14-year-old who all of a sudden got marched around in some kind of pride parade at school and who's feeling some angst and discomfort, maybe a girl who's experiencing her feminine issues for the very first time, and that thought frightens her. And all of a sudden we're going to say, hey, well, guess what? Maybe you really were a boy. God makes mistakes, or maybe you're a male brain born in a female body. I don't even know how they kind of justify it. But then all of a sudden that kid goes, oh, you mean I can make this change, and now I'm going to be celebrated, and I'm not going to be socially awkward and shunned, but now I actually get to be part of the cool kid. Well, of course. I mean, that's an easy case to make. I mean, we can see how that happens, but then it doesn't mean that kid isn't going to grow up and go, hey, wait a second. That wasn't right. That was just a phase or a fad or a stage. I mean, you see the studies that show 80 to 90% of those kids outgrow it. Well, the ones whose parents went out and listened to the doctor saying that your child's at risk of suicide, you got to get gender affirming care. Now what?
Yeah, that's what Laura was
I
saying.
was just about to say that.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I mean, and
Great
by
minds
the
think
way,
alike, Laura.
if you're politicizing, whatever you want to, however you want to put it, if you're politicizing science, so now all of a sudden we have to take 40 years of history from John Hopkins. And by the way, the Swiss did a lot of research on this. We're not allowed to talk about that anymore. It's like we completely throw the handbook out. If you're politicizing the science, like unfortunately it was with COVID, then you're not having an honest discussion. You're not having an honest debate. And there are perfectly, I think, and we have obviously children, and we're starting to deal with some of these issues. They are arising. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. You're going eventually, if you haven't, you will run into real world impacts of this happening, these changes occurring. And there's a lot of questions that have just been left completely unanswered on how we're supposed to deal with this stuff. We've gotten to gender neutral bathrooms, John. We've gotten to trans, whether, locker room stuff, but there's a lot more that goes into this. And then unfortunately, like you said, it's perfectly normal to be confused when you're young. People have, confusing feelings, and they're exploring this developing sexuality. And we're really, society overreacts a lot. And I think this is something we can't afford to overreact with, but that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Well, and you know, unfortunately, it seems to be the root cause that gets down to everything. Again, we have to ask ourselves why we're letting these hospitals do these, you know, clinics. And it turns out, is I think it was Matt Walsh that did that expose over at Vanderbilt. You know, it's big business. It's big money. I mean,
It's money,
you know, they've
buddy.
got to be on these drugs and hormones and puberty blockers for a long time. And the cost of the surgery, I mean, it's unconscionable that we would let these kids go through this. And unfortunately, I think the first couple of detransitioners who we're seeing who are filing suits is just going to be the tip of the iceberg. And again, I want to make sure, because I have some friends who feel like they're liberal. They're not really liberal. It's just they don't like the heat that they get. It's not that we decry people who are genuinely transgender or who are dealing with some of those issues. No, it's because we love them and care about them. It's just that some of these things, especially at an early age, don't bear good fruit. I unfortunately have a family member who has dealt with this. Thank God we didn't rush out and get affirmative care. And then she later came to the conclusion that there were some mental health issues there and it really didn't have anything to do with. But for a period of time, she was around and just constantly other people who were transgender. And again, all God's children, my brothers and sisters. So I only want the best for them. But I never
Confusing.
saw a more dysfunctional group of people in my life, and it broke my heart because when you wrap your whole identity over the fact that you were born into the wrong gender, I can't imagine that that's a very stable platform to build off of.
You know, it really does, and I'm trying to work this out right here. But thank God that it went that way for you, because I have heard some absolute horror stories, and it's too late. It's too late. You know, it's not just this issue. The entire issue of mental illness in this country is being ignored. And if COVID, no kidding, if it didn't expose, if COVID, the pandemic, didn't expose that this country is suffering from mass mental illness, then I don't know what could get us to wake up and see that, John, and then finally try to tackle that problem. And again, I think a lot of it does, not that, you know, I'm not saying people of faith don't deal with their own you know, issues. Of course they do. I'm just saying, when you struggle to know who you are, what you believe in, right, what is right, what is wrong, it obviously makes it a much less stable you know, a situation. So yeah, I mean, it really comes down to you know, the fact that we've had now, I remember when I was growing up as a kid as well, we've gone in the wrong direction when it came to dealing with the look. If you're going to have an entire generation of divorcees and children coming out of this, you know, are going to have a difficult time. And what was our answer all the way through the 80s and 90s? We just jammed pills down these kids' throats. It's a chemical imbalance. It's a chemical imbalance. Now we know all of these years later, it was not a chemical imbalance. God knows what we did to those kids with those pills. You know, and it's at a point now where it's going to, you know, those kids are growing up. Those kids have responsibilities. So it's got to be addressed, because now those kids are going to have kids, you know. And I'm just, my generation specifically, you know, was a crapshoot whether or not this would be a total disaster. I'm serious.
Well, that's kind of the common theme in everything we've discussed here, and we've covered a wide array. Sorry, I've kind of taken you off, but it's good to talk to you again. But you know, that's the one thing that I'd like to, like, when I go on Twitter and I see the same old, you know, kind of Democrat hacks who are pushing out these narratives. If I could take them and have a serious one-on-one conversation with them, and they would answer me truthfully, I would just like to know, give me one aspect of what is occurring in this country right now, socially, culturally, economically, you know, financially. Just give me one thing that you think is going in the right direction. I mean, I see the right track, wrong track polls, and I see, you know, 35% of the country think we're on the right track. In what regard? I mean, maybe for them personally, but I don't see how you could see this country is heading in the right direction.
Well, I'm a little bit surprised, actually, because, and it just signed me out, or I was going to put it back up, but it's still going to be negative, quite negative. But, you know, our right track, wrong track was as bad as like 70 something to 19, 20%. 22, I think, was the low. I'd have to go back and look at the track, but it does look like now we're back up to roughly, probably would say about a third. It's going to look like. I mean, it's not all of the results are not fully weighted. I have some results weighted and ready to go, and I'm going to get them out today. But that it did improve. Yet Biden's approval rating doesn't look to have improved a lot. It's going to be negative. Maybe it ends up a little higher. So I'm just wondering, and this is something we're going to have to talk about in a subsequent show, probably Friday, going over the poll results. But what is it that is making these people feel like things are better than they were 6 months ago, before the election? I don't know. I don't have an immediate answer. And I didn't ask about issues, voting issues. So, perhaps that would have helped illuminate that, John. But, we have destabilization in Europe, Northeast Asia, the Middle East. The economy is on the brink of, I don't think people understand, the economy is on the brink of collapse. Right. Maybe that's what it comes down to. Inflation eased a little bit. So they're a little bit, they're feeling a little bit better, even though Biden's approval on inflation looks to be about like 29% or 31. It's going to end up somewhere around there. But they do think that it eased a little bit. I don't know. I can't explain it. What do you think it is? You think we just got beyond the election?
I think diminished expectations, maybe.
Diminished expectations.
Yeah, it's kind of become the new normal. Everybody, I mean, look, fortunately in Texas, because we are such a conservative state and there are some bastions, around the country like that, our economy is relatively good. It's not near as good as it was, a year or 2 years ago, but things are relatively good. And I just think that people have gotten so conditioned to bad news and just these utterly abject failures by our ruling class oligarchs over and over again, that it doesn't move the needle for them anymore.
I think, man, Laura just messaged me. I think Diminished Expectations is a good song title. And I'm serious, because now that I'm getting older, some of the material I'm writing isn't going to be about the stuff. It's not going to sound like it did when I was like, younger and writing a song. It's not going to be about chasing girls or making money. It's going to, I'm trying to have a little bit more serious of a note. The unsure part of the right track, wrong track, John, is 10%, roughly where it was and has been. It's not like some big leap there, but without a doubt, it'll be like negative 20 something, where we had it almost negative 40. It may very well just be that they did get used to the new normal under Obama, and they thought 2%, GDP growth was rock star growth. They did. So yeah, and that's impossible. That's a real possible answer. I got to get to a break, but you got to come. You better come back. This was fascinating. We could go on forever.
Pleasure. Yeah, no, I always enjoy visiting with you and would welcome the chance to get back on anytime. And next time you guys are in Texas, let me know. I'd love for us all to get together again.
I'll be there next month. I'll see you next month. I'll be.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Don told me.
Right.
Yeah, that you're coming to that little speaking gig we got going on. Great.
Sure will. And I don't know if he told you, but I'll be, it looks like I'll be bringing a special guest with me, which will be pretty cool. Tell people where to, I'll get it. Laura's like, don't forget. Tell people where to find you, John. I mean, you were a big hit. I'm reading the comments. You were a big hit. This was great conversation.
Well, great. Thank you.
Where can people find you and read your stuff?
So I've got a website. It's www.johnscorner.com. So there's no apostrophe for John's Corner. And it's where I post most of my op-eds and some pictures of some of the events and stuff we did. And everybody, can follow me. I believe in, virtual anonymity. So I think my Twitter name's just John C. O'Shea. And same thing with Facebook. Yeah. When we were tagging it on,
whether it was YouTube, whether it was Twitter, Getter, Truth, it was all the same. It's very easy. johnscorner.com, but also John C. O'Shea across Twitter, Getter, you name it. Great follow. And always incredibly thoughtful pieces. Your piece on gun control a while back, people should go back and read that. And again, mental health was a big part of that article you wrote. Extremely thoughtful. And that's what I love about your stuff, John, is that it really does get beyond these stupid talking points that every show is just, nonsense talking points. And it's almost like our discourse model is broken, and it doesn't allow us to get any deeper than very superficial, right? Very high.
To score points for your team. Yeah. Don't actually try and get to the real heart of the problem. And unfortunately for me, I think critical thinking is in short supply in our country these days.
Couldn't agree with you more. Platitudes and zingers, and that's really that's what it's geared towards. That's sad. But yeah, John O'Shea, everybody, you're going to see more of him. I can tell you that. I can promise you that. Come back and visit us, John. I really appreciated you coming on.
All right. And bye, Laura.
She said, you hear it? Bye, John.
Yeah, I heard her.
All the best,
Y'all
buddy.
take care. Thanks.
You too. John O'Shea, everybody. That was like some fascinating conversation. I mean, beyond banking. But he has the experience. He knows not just the policy, but the procedure, which is why I wanted to have him on. He had those reports in front of him. This is what I'm talking about with these regulators. So if you're just a little bank, you're bleeding out right now, you don't have the ability to navigate the system, you're definitely going to get a call from these, from field supervision out there and the regulators. And yet these other banks are allowed to operate recklessly with impunity because of who their depositors are, because of who their friends are. And it is unbelievably corrupting our system. And they're not even good at it. They're not even good at it. He said something before that I don't think I heard anybody say. Tech startups are risky. Everybody knows that. And they didn't diversify. I remember a time where it was almost impossible to get venture capital for tech startups. Nobody wanted to back stuff like that. Wasn't that long ago, let alone have your entire portfolio almost filled with them. All right. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Great job, John. Man, it was a very illuminating conversation. Very illuminating. All right, let's take a real quick break. When we come back, we'll go over. I do want to talk more about that right track, wrong track we were talking about. I think that one is weighted, but the bottom line is it's not going to change that much. We're going to have about 60% say the country set it on the wrong track, and probably like 30 say that it set it on the right track, or maybe even a little bit more. Because I can see certain groups are underrepresented. So when the weight variable gets applied to that, then it will change slightly. So it's like, but I don't think it'll change all that much. I really don't. And I'm wondering what on earth is how can we account for this? Diminished expectations. That really may be it. Because before there was an election, so maybe people were thinking, it's an election, we can change some stuff, things. But at this point, maybe they're just kind of, gas isn't as high as it was. Yeah, groceries still suck, but inflation is not slow. It's slowed, but it did not decrease. That's a talking point. But those talking points may be working with some people. The jobs numbers on their surface look good, or at least the Bureau of Labor Statistics. ADP is not great at all. All right. So let's take a quick break and we'll be back and we'll talk more about this. All right. Laura and I have tried a lot of stuff. I've tried a lot of stuff. I'll tell you that. And it's all just junk science. And bring it to the doctor, show it to them, go over it, and they'll tell you what they think of it. And that's what they had to say about all of these things that we had tried in the past. And that's because when I'm going and trying to find my 5 healthy servings of fruit and vegetables a day, it's junk science, because these other products use extracts of common produce department fruits and vegetables with few health benefits. You're basically better off just gobbling down a whole bunch yourself every day and having a bloated stomach. I take Field of Greens because it's the whole organic fruit and vegetable, not a watered down supplement. And it's backed by their Better Health Promise. Each ingredient, which I've read to you before, laundry list, in Field of Greens was scientifically chosen to support vital organs like your heart, your lungs, kidney health. Others support my immune system, blood pressure, metabolism, and healthy weight loss. I don't eat as healthy as I should. Who does? That's why I take Field of Greens. Like me, you'll probably look and feel healthier fast and have way more energy. Everyone's experience is different. But your best proof will be at your next checkup when your doctor says, whatever you're doing, it's working, keep it up. Let me get you started with 15% off today. Go to fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code TPP right there on the screen. That's promo code TPP at fieldofgreens.com. bean.com. And as always, let me know what you think about it. Send me your comments. Send Laura and I your comments. What flavor did you get? We want to know. And what was your experience? Of course. Everybody so far has pretty much had a very, or at least very close to experience of mine, but don't let up. If you got it, don't let up. Give it 2 weeks, give it 3 weeks. Watch the difference to your skin, your hair, right, Laura? Give it time. Do not, because you feel better right away, you're like, oh, I have more energy, I don't have to take a 5-hour energy drink today. Keep it up. Don't be just satisfied with those results. All right. Believe me, you will see a difference. All right. And I got to tell you about this great deal from our friends at Jam and Bean. Patriots and artists artists in the, what's the word I'm looking for? The trade of coffee roasting. All right. Right now they're offering a deal. I don't know how long it's going to last, but use the promo code TPP40 at checkout. If you're getting a new subscription, you'll get 40% off of their coffee and subscriptions, but also, or whatever you subscribe to, but also you will still get the 10% on the subsequent renewals, the People's Pundit 10% off that we originally had. All right. Jam and Bean, again, has delicious popcorn, different flavors of coffee for everybody. Their roast is amazing. And they also happen to be Patriots, by the way. All right. So again, Jam and Bean, JAMN, bean.com, promo code TPP40. That'll get you 40% off that first subscription. And then you'll still get the 10% on the subsequent subscriptions. And of course, as always, let us know what you think. We love hearing about the coffee and the popcorn. The popcorn's incredible. As a matter of fact, I got a bag on my desk right now. Kid you not. That's what happened to the sour cream and chives. Sour cream and chives is delicious. Buffalo is delicious. They're all delicious, but that's just what I like. The dill was amazing. And if you have a sweet tooth, I'm not a big fan of caramel popcorn. I'm not. But that Laura is. That caramel popcorn is amazing. And they have this, like, the aftertaste is the bomb, right, Laura? It's like this, it almost tastes like a very caramel butter like melt that drifts off, and it's just delicious. And by the way, it's affordable. You'll see a lot of expensive gourmet popcorn out there. That's not Jam and Bean. All right. Jam and Bean is well worth it. Let's see. Did I get to all those questions, Laura, before John left? I think so. I think I did. So, little veggies dancing in your head. I'm telling you, it's good. There's some funny comments in the comment. Looking at it, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know what's going on. Very, very close between whether or not more people say they will vote in the Republican presidential nomination as of now over the Democratic nomination, which really should not be too surprising, especially when there's an incumbent. Now, if it all breaks out, and Joe Biden has an issue, loses support, whatever it may be, if it all breaks out, then Joe Biden could have a serious problem here. We spoke to, we were done with Democrats. Man, Biden's going to be at he's in the 30s. And by the way, what's taking so long? You have to wait for registered voters, to wait for likely voters, which we are going to separate, but I want to show it all to you. And then, of course, Republicans and Democrats that's, I think, a problem that a lot of pollsters are doing. I'm looking at some of these nomination polls, Monmouth, I'm looking at you. You only had 500 registered voters, and you had very educated. But whatever, I'll let it do its thing. I'm just saying, this happened in 2015 and 16 as well. That's why his vote share was underestimated quite a bit. Florida was, I think, the pollster for Monmouth, I remember before the Florida primary, they were like, listen, if Marco Rubio wins, I forgot what he said, I'll eat my hat or something. But he was just like, and they were like, oh, why? You think he's not going to win? And he's like, I'm telling you right now, Marco Rubio is not going to win. But they said he was only a little bit behind, and there was a narrative that he actually was surging right before the primary, and he wound up getting thrashed. But that's why. that happened then as well. I could see it clear as day. It was way too educated, and Rubio did a little bit better with educated voters. And in the end, Republican primaries are not dominated by educated voters. All right. Although under Trump, we did see non-working class, non-college working class, same voters, basically shifting into some college associates. That's becoming a very powerful group for Republicans now. It's becoming a very Republican group, some college associate degree. And, we'll see if that lasts. Why? Because things change. The electorate changes, things shift, and it is what it is. Let's see if I can actually show you where, for people who want to know. I mean, this is where Biden is in the raw, folks. This is where he is in the raw. I mean, that is not good. Unsure is number 2. Michelle Obama, number 3. Bernie Sanders, number 4. Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Hillary Clinton, Gavin Newsom, someone else, and Junior comes in with around like 3%. Although it is a little, it's possible Junior gets bumped up to like 4. We'll see with the weights. I don't know. The Democrats aren't that. How can I say this without confusing people? The weights that have to be applied to the Democratic primary vote is not significant. So I would not expect it to be much different than what you see here. Okay. But this is an underreported story. And I'm sorry, I got my son out there running around. He wants to get to me. I can hear him. This is an underreported story. If you look at, let's compare this while I keep that up on the screen. Let's look at Herbert Walker Bush, G. George W. H.W. Bush primary nomination polls, from 1988. Let's look into, or 1992, excuse me. Bush had challenges, but he's still, and let me see if Gallup's got it. Gallup election review 07. Nah, Gallup put a lot in their archives. But the bottom line is, where I'm going with this is that in 1992, Bush had some serious challenges from Pat Buchanan, and then later that broke off and became, part of the Ross Perot coalition. Even he had a problem, where. And David Duke actually got 119,000 votes that year, less than a point, but still, the bottom line is I'm looking for polling. And at the end of the day, Bush did get most of these delegates. We got the Iowa caucuses were canceled that year. Shocker. The New Hampshire primary, Bush, he won 53-38. Let's see. So he took 23 delegates. South Dakota, he won 69% in South Dakota. So where's South Carolina? That's what I'm curious about. He won 67% in South Carolina. So ultimately, he was able to consolidate it. My point here, I don't know, and I'd be happy to invite you guys to look. I don't know any other case in modern history where an incumbent president got this bad this early in the primary polling, in the nomination polling. Now, hang on one second. Sorry, he's having a bit of a meltdown, and I can't concentrate with him doing that. But I don't, Bush had a flank. He had a problem. Carter had an issue, for sure, but not really. Not like this. Obama had two states revolt. Other than that, he got pretty high shares of the vote, and the primary polling was dominant. It is a completely underreported story how poorly Joe Biden is performing in nomination polls. And on the first day, I actually thought maybe this was going to rectify him, and we were going to be an outlier and come out with Biden much higher than other people have found. We are not seeing that. It's not happening. And I'm looking through the comments, guys. Let me read your comments here. I'm curious. Who else, yeah, Evan Jones telling Alvin Bragg to back off. Yeah. And locals, drop them in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Rumble, tell me what you think. Getter, tell me what you think. I can't find another example of somebody doing this bad, an incumbent president doing this bad. And this isn't a conversation when the sitting president of the United States, who, let's face it, has almost universal institutional backing. There is like one guy in Minnesota who wants to see a challenge to Biden. But the Democratic Governors Association, which met in D.C. a couple of months ago, they made it very clear. Even Phil Murphy wound up sitting down with Politico to discuss this because they were doing a story on whether or not there was real concern that Biden is doing so poorly. And Murphy said, no, we're all with him. Everyone's with him. I forgot his name out. And hold on. I'll get you his name right now. It's important for me to know this name. Primary Biden, Minnesota. It's a congressman, I think. Or former congressman. No. Oh, man. Come on. See? Come on. Here it is. I knew he wrote an article recently. Not too recent, but I read it. Dean Phillips. That's it. It's Dean Phillips. All right. And he writes, and here's Mark Leibowitz, I guess, is the case for a primary challenge to Joe Biden. I hate giving the Atlantic any clicks whatsoever, but I don't want to bring up him. I think it's better if we let me put this. Let's read the Atlantic. Let's be broad in the spectrum of sources that we read. Okay. Joe Biden sounds like, and this, by the way, was just February of this year. Joe Biden seems like he's running again. God love him. He will most likely make this official in the next couple of months. And with the support of nearly every elected Democrat in the range of a microphone. It's true. It's absolutely true. That is how things are typically done in Washington. The White House shall make you primary proof. The gods of groupthink have decreed as much. Unless some free-thinking Democrat comes along and chooses to ignore groupthink. In private, of course, and this is very much, I will be honest, this is very much true. Many elected Democrats say Biden is too old to run again and that they wish he'd step away, which aligns with what large majorities of Democrats and independents have been telling pollsters for months. The public silence around the president's predicament has become tiresome and potentially catastrophic for the Democratic Party. Somebody should make a refreshing nuance of themselves and involve the voters in this decision. Yes, this would be a radical move and would anger a bunch of Democrats inside the various power area of D.C., starting with the biggest one of all, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. There would be immediate blowback from donors, the Democratic National Committee, and the other party institutions, but do it anyway, preferably before Biden makes his final decision, while there's an opening. If approached deftly, the gambit could benefit the president, the party, and even the challenger's own standing, win or lose. There has to be one good challenger X out there from the party's supposed deep bench, right? Someone who is compelling, formidable, and younger than, say, 65. Someone who is not Marianne Williamson, which is, I didn't even put her on there because it was before I did get word that she is, in fact, going to run. That's serious. I think it's already a done deal. Someone who would be unfailingly gracious to Biden and reverential of his career, even while trying to end it. And what do they mean? What do they mean by that? They mean, that they'll protect his legacy, say he did a good job as president, and try to keep most of his policies in place. Before we start tossing out names, let's establish a big to be sure. To be sure, primaries can be very bad for presidents seeking re-election. There is good reason no incumbent has been subjected to a serious inter-party challenge in more than 3 decades, not since the Republican Pat Buchanan launched a populist incursion against President George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992. That is the example we just went over. A dozen years earlier, President Jimmy Carter had endured an acrid primary challenge from Senator Edward Kennedy. Both Carter and Bush managed to hold off their challenges, but they came away battered and wound up losing their general elections. All right. But I don't think Carter was ever polling that badly. I have to look and see. You know what? Let's look. Carter v. Kennedy. Primary nomination polls. Let's see. 1980, then primaries. God, it's so hard to find nowadays. Unfortunately, why? Because there was the periodic. It's not like now. There were the periodic news polls that came out. The one who was in it for the race, the long haul, was Gallup, and unfortunately for Gallup, they gave up on horse races when they blew Romney versus Obama, and it wasn't even that bad of a call. They had Romney +1, Obama won by about 3, if I remember correctly. It looks like, Carter takes Iowa, he takes Maine, he takes New Hampshire, he loses Massachusetts, no surprise. He goes on to take the next 3, 6, 9, 12 contests before losing Connecticut and New York. He loses Arizona. In between, he wins 3, loses Arizona, wins South Carolina, loses Pennsylvania. That was pretty devastating, by the way, but it was close, very close. 0.28%. Missouri goes to Carter. Vermont and Michigan go to Kennedy. Texas and Colorado go to Carter. And District of Columbia goes to Kennedy. He loses D.C., a sitting president. Unbelievable. What's his name? Others. Michigan caucuses were a complete and total disaster for Jimmy Carter. He didn't even really, it wasn't a competition. All right, so on and on. Others, 171%. Oregon, Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Nevada go to Carter. He loses California in a pretty close race, about 7 points. Not super close, but closer than some of the others. Montana, Carter wins it, 12%. Someone else gets 12%. New Jersey and New Mexico go to Kennedy. Ohio goes to Carter. Rhode Island and South Dakota go to Kennedy. West Virginia goes to Carter. So you can see they can be pretty devastating. Again, though, Carter was never this weak. His support was always nationally stronger than this. I'd love to dig up Gallup's old polling. Biden, however, is a special case for 2 reasons. The first concerns the disconnect between how affectionately most Democrats view him versus their desire to move on from him. Recent surveys show that 60% of Democrats don't want Biden to run again. I didn't ask that question, do you want him to run again? Because, again, I saw no value in it. You either vote for him because you want him to run again or you don't. And in this poll, as you can clearly see, or I had it up before, 65% don't want Joe Biden. They want someone else. These spigots of cold water in the polls have been accompanied by icy buckets of liberal commentary and chilly assessments from mostly anonymous elected Democrats in the press. By contrast, large majorities of Republicans want Donald Trump to seek re-election in 2020, and an overwhelming consensus of Democrats wanted Barack Obama to run again in 2012. Same with Republicans George W. Bush in 2004 and Democrat Bill Clinton in 1996. Why should Biden not enjoy the same coronation? He's done a good job in the eyes of the people who voted for him in 2020. That's not true. 10%, roughly on average, 10% of Biden's voters would vote for Donald Trump now. They do not, those people, and it's not a small number, do not think they made the right choice. So it's a big vulnerability. His party overperformed in the midterms. He seems to be humming along fine. Feisty State of the Union here, muscular visit to Ukraine there. Oh my God. You mean muscular as in staging an air raid? And endless jokers to the right. He has achieved important things, blah, 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 blah. Allow me to point out, if you don't already know, that Biden is old. He's 80 and will be 82 on Inauguration Day in 2025. And will hit 86 if he makes it all the way through a second term. He was born during the Roosevelt administration. Franklin, not Teddy, but still. The Delaware Corvette has flipped through the odometer a time or two. I've pointed this out before in this publication. The White House does not like that story, did not like that story. But it was true then, and it's truer now. By 8 months, a lot more Democrats are getting a lot more anxious. All right, Dean Phillips of Minnesota. This is not a knock on Joe Biden, just a wish for competition. He's basically alone, publicly anyway. Everybody else including what's the other? She's in a very tight district, actually. She survived and shouldn't have survived. Marcy Kaptur in Ohio. And there's another one in Minnesota. You know, where they are doing this. They're supporting Biden not because there's two reasons why. One are political favors, and it's a political machine thing. The other one is, and I think Phil Murphy represents this. They think Biden beat Trump. They expect Trump to be the nominee. And they say Biden beat Trump already. He's the one who can beat him. If we go to somebody else, we may end up with a President Trump. Dean Phillips has pointed out there's a flaw in this argument. Donald Trump can say, I told you so. And Dean Phillips is not ignoring what I just told you, which is that there is a significant chunk of Biden voters from 2020 who now say, I will vote for Donald Trump. So Phil Murphy's argument is really weak. Unless, folks, and I want you to consider this, and I'm going to say this coy. In 2022, Democrats did have a good harvesting operation, but it wasn't what we saw in 2020. Joe Biden said, and I quote, we are building the most sophisticated you-know-what operation in the country, in the history. Does that come along with Joe Biden only? Some of the stuff that we've gone over in Michigan, Pennsylvania, with those connections to Joe Biden, are they not available to everyone? Would they? You following what I'm saying? Because Lord, you look, we'll tell you what we saw was not possible without certain organizations helping out. Public sector unions, state and federal, the United States Postal Service. Would they not be willing to do that for everybody? Like, let's say, Bernie Sanders, who is currently in, well, he's in third if you don't count unsure, no opinion. If you just, fix unsure, no opinion to the bottom, which is coming in at roughly 12%. And Bernie's right behind Michelle Obama, right behind her. They're basically tied. Kamala Harris is at 8%. Pete Buttigieg is at 7%. Hillary Clinton is at 7%. Gavin Newsom is at 4%, which I've told you guys, Gavin probably does want to run for president. However, you cannot win a Democratic nomination with white liberals. You can't. There are not enough of them. And someone else is at 4%. Robert Kennedy's at 3%. So it's looking like Bernie. It's looking like Bernie's the only one because Kamala is not going to make it. Which, by the way, you should find that article from Politico and read it because it's funny. Some of these Democratic governors are like, oh, dear God. Oh, God, no. Oh, God, no. Not Kamala. She'll get killed. Trump will crush her. It's hilarious because they know she's just an unlikable person and not very bright. Does not come across as the sharpest tool in the shed. Evan, who would be favored to win Georgia, Trump or Biden? Even when we had Walker and Warnock basically trading off 2-point leads, Evan, Trump was still massively ahead. Massively. He outperformed Walker by like 7 points. And we're not alone in that. Go and look at the head-to-heads that you saw with Emerson, even when they had Walker up by 1 or 2. Warnock up by 1 or 2. Go look at who else pulled the head-to-head. Rasmussen pulled the head-to-head. Trump was up by 11. And I think Emerson was 11 too. We were almost 11. We were like 10.8, which we got totally trashed over. And then there was like 2 polls 48 hours later that showed the same. So he would have to, it would be curious to see whether Georgia would tighten more. But Trump was way ahead in the state of Georgia. He was even, and let me see, do I have it in front of me? Georgia was close in the raw. They were close. And you can kind of see it was close, but this last fall, it was not close. Georgia primary and midterm elections, fall 2021. Did I polled at that time. Georgia primary and midterm elections 2022. Let me see. That was a big survey. Let me see if I can look at the. All right. So 930. This was from when? Fall 2021. So let's go in order. Fall of 2021. Trump 52, Biden 43. Going back, let's see if it tightened by the time it was the nomination. By the time it was. No, it didn't. It actually is a little bit more. But when lean, though, it's Trump 53, Biden 47. So when leaned, and by the way, in that one, Scott Walker and Warnock were tied at 47. So with leaners. So it's a good question. It'd be interesting to see if that would hold. It really would. So let me go ahead and finish crunching the polls so we can have it to discuss on Friday in more detail. There's a lot to it. It's much more than what we've talked about, obviously. We have the Economic Confidence Index, Biden's approvals on inflation, immigration, the economy, crime, and foreign policy. Right track, wrong track. What else? 2024 matchups. Listen, when this poll goes out, because it's going to go out later today, do not neglect age and race when you're comparing how each Republican candidate does against Joe Biden. All right? Particularly 18 to 24s, 25 to 29s, to 40 to 49s. Don't neglect looking at that. And then race. Okay? Look at Hispanics. Look at blacks. I mean, everyone, obviously the white vote is the largest share, but elections are won on margins. All right? So just make sure you look at that. And of course, education, but make sure you look at that. All right. All right. So, where we at? So, okay. Right. So we'll do that. We'll have more to talk. Oh, and the CIA question. All right. I don't want to get into the strike, so I'll just hold off on that. And then, would you vote for the party's nominee or not? Of course, is a big one. All right. But to wrap up what I was saying here, Dean Phillips says, in the business world, if the dominant brand in a category had favorability ratings like the current president does, you would see a number of established brands jump into that category. Believe me, there are literally hundreds in Congress who would say the same thing, but they simply won't say a word. All right. And I'm not going to repeat, Phillips without being on a tirade or something, but it's the machine holding him together. Big story. Joe Biden's weakness in the polls is a huge story. Fed raised rates 25 basis points. Jay? Oh, man, I wish John was still on to talk about that. Special guest. Special thanks to my guest, John O'Shea, for coming on. We got to have John back, Laura. That was great. It was. I mean, he was amazing. Don't forget to follow him at John C. O'Shea on Twitter, on Getter, on Truth. All right. And check out his writings at John's Corner, because they are amazing. So look at the gun control one, because we got into the discussion on mental health. That was an amazing article he wrote. And again, we've had the Second Amendment for over 2.5 centuries. We have not had major mental illness like we have now. And that is the root of our problem. All right. Also, thanks to the sponsors, and thank you for supporting those sponsors. You can always go, of course, like I said, and use those promo codes. It does not have to be during the show. Go check out jamandbean.com. Use that. I don't know how long this is going to last. Promo code TPP40 to get 40%, almost half off your first subscription. It has to be a subscription. And then when you do, you'll get 40 that first sign up, and then 10% still off on every reoccurring subscription. So again, jamandbean.com. For patriots.com, use the promo code TPP10. The best deal is definitely the 3-month kit. That would be, you're going to save the most if you use the promo code on that. I mean, it's 10% across the board. I'm just saying it's the best deal. And because, you want to use it on a purchase that you're going to save a good deal of money on, that would be on that 3-month survival kit, TPP10 at checkout. For patriots.com, see what you get along with the 3-month kit. All right. Before you decide what else to get. I'm just giving you the heads up. Field of Greens. Get healthy. Get healthy. Use the promo code TPP to get 15% off Field of Greens. All right. And as always, send us your feedback. We want to hear from you. All right. All right, folks. Best place as always to follow along. What we're doing is right there. Join the revolution. peoplespundit.locals.com. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Share the public polling project far and wide. I did just pull the trigger because I knew this indictment news was coming, and we had to see. Had to get we had to put our finger on the pulse of the voters now to get a baseline, to get a benchmark, to have something to compare later to see how, if anything, if at all, public opinion is impacted by this as time goes on. All right. So again, Friday, noon Eastern Standard Time, going over many, 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 many more poll results. See you then, folks. Thanks for watching.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad